and welcome to the Club Life podcast. I'm Darren Flynn, the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at Clubs New South Wales. And in this episode, we're going to take you to the central tablelands region of New South Wales to talk to Peter Sargent. Peter's been the CEO of Bathurst RSL for almost 13 years. So let's find out what drew him to the industry and what he does when he's not busy running the club. Peter Sargent, welcome and thanks for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me, Darren. It's a pleasure.
Now, we're going to rip into your career in the very near future. Before we do, we're recording this episode just a couple of days after the Bathurst 1000. Can you give us a bit of a snapshot into the crazy couple of days that Bathurst undergo each year when we have the Bathurst 1000?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's obviously an amazing event for the town. Look, it's probably not as crazy as it used to be. It was a lot more sort of hectic 20 years ago when you had street parties and people sort of would come into the club or come into the pub and they'd have, a bowl of chips and 10 schooners. Nowadays, the crowd's changed fairly substantially and they will come in for a schnitzel and 2 or 3 4X Gold or, a mid-strength, and then they'll go back up to the track. But what we see is the club is packed with dining. So we've seen it move more from a drinking crowd to an eating crowd. And this year was particularly good because they changed some of the format. We had a street parade on the Wednesday afternoon and they had a lot of events sort of going on during the week that actually drove business in the door. It was probably the best race weekend we've seen for quite a few years. So it was excellent. To be honest, it's kind of just become part of what we do now. It's not so much the epic, here comes race week. It's more just rolling into an extra busy period.
You grew up in Bathurst. Tell us a bit about your childhood and what it was like growing up in the regional town.
Bathurst's changed a lot in many ways, and in some ways it hasn't changed at all. It's still a big country town at heart. People say that probably somewhat glibly about a lot of regional centres, but we're seeing a lot more people moving across the Sandstone Curtain and placing themselves in Bathurst for lifestyle and affordability and things like that. So that the town that I grew up in has turned into a major regional city now, and so it's definitely different, but it still has a great feel. And obviously, having been born and raised here, and my family go back a long way in Bathurst, I've got a really soft spot in my heart for the place.
Now, you started your career, or your hospitality career, pretty much straight out of high school. Walk us through those first few roles.
I'm a bit of a boomerang. I started out in a guest house in Katoomba, just tending bar on weekends. And then, as you do in those places, you end up doing everything. So I spent a couple of years in Katoomba. We had 26 guest rooms, 2 guest cottages, and 80-seat a la carte restaurant, and a couple of bars. It was a great little guest house and a good way to sort of get your teeth into hospitality. From there, I moved down to Sheraton Hotels and Resorts and worked at Sydney Airport in what was then the Sheraton Sydney Airport Hotel, which was a brand new hotel. Then went to Noosa, spent some time in Noosa with my bride, who I met working in Sydney. And I sort of cut my teeth, I guess, in guest houses and the international hotels. And then Melanie and I decided to move back to Bathurst, then ended up falling into HR, which is a long story. And I did that for about 12 years. And then I got talking to the guy who was running this place at the time, and he heard about my hospitality background. I'd been enlisted onto the local business chamber for my sins. I ended up actually as president of the Bathurst Business Chamber at the time, and got talking to David Vaness, and he suggested that I come and work with him. So I did that for a couple of years as the assistant manager here. And then, as I said, I'm a bit of a boomerang. So I ended up going back to Simplot for a couple of years, and then ended up coming back to Bathurst RSL when the top job came up, and I've been here ever since.
And what drew you back to Clubland? So you had that initial stint as an assistant manager and then the CEO's job came back. Why was that so appealing to you in 2012?
Oh, look, I think hospitality's always been my first love. That's how I describe it. I love the industry. I love people. The HR stuff was great. I really enjoyed the industrial relations, particularly the challenge of some of the more complex stuff that we had to deal with industrially. But it really burned you out very quickly, and dealing in just that sort of stuff all the time wasn't very rewarding. Whereas, and the thing I love about clubs is, particularly if you're a general manager or CEO, you do everything from, I'll still walk behind the bar and pull a beer every now and then and take Keno or whatever. You're a property developer, you're a property investor, you're a business operator. Our business has changed so much. There's never a dull moment. It's an exciting and fun industry to work in. So I guess that's what brought me back.
We asked this question of some other CEOs in previous episodes, but how important is it for a CEO to be involved in the operations of the club, around your people and knowing what their day-to-day is like? I
think in a regional club it's critical. I think the members want to see you. When you're in the country particularly, if they never see you, then they'll go, what's that bloody Sargent do? I always cop a bit of a ribbing when I pull a beer. Someone will say, the boss is doing some work for a change and things like that, but the members actually love it. And I think the staff also like it because, if they see you get in and have a crack when they're busy. Like if you walk past a bar and they're flat out, I just think it's wrong to keep walking and not jump in and help. I actually love it too, because the interaction with the members is fun. And to be honest, that's the fun part of the job, you know. Certainly my attitude is there's nothing in this place I won't do. I've cleaned toilets, I've mopped floors, I've washed dishes, I've done all that sort of stuff over the years. I've built up a fabulous team now. But I do think it definitely lifts the spirits of the team if they'll see you willing to get in and have a crack. And I think it's good for the soul.
Let's talk about your board. You're in a unique position there at Bathurst RSL in that you are one of those clubs with a husband and wife on the board. Tell us about that experience.
Well, look, I was lucky, I guess, in that because obviously from a governance point of view, that can raise a question mark, I suppose. But I had known Athena Coral because Coral had been a big part of the club, even just as a member. So I'd known her for a long time. Obviously, there's always that sort of, I guess, initial reservation about how's that going to work in the boardroom. But I've been really blessed that I've got 7 great people who genuinely think about the club first. And so it's never been an issue in terms of, you know, voting or any contention. They sort of work both independently and together. They're a bloody good team. I'm very blessed, really. I've got a great board and it's been now very stable for 10 years. We actually had our first election this year for 10 years. You know, some people say that's a bad thing from a governance point of view, you know, that there's the opportunity to get stale. From my mind, it's been an amazing period of stability where I've had a great team that I can work with and we've been able to take the place forward. So we're pretty blessed in that regard, mate.
A lot's changed since you took over as CEO of Bathurst RSL back in 2012, particularly for the wider industry. Tell us about your observations of change over that period of time.
Everybody knows that food has become a major focus. Gaming, you know, it still continues to be, I guess, the thing that keeps us afloat, I suppose. But we've worked hard to change that over the years. And I think the food offering of so many clubs now is just amazing. Perfect Place, you know, Chef's Table, those sorts of competitions have seen so many clubs step up and change their offering. People are choosing to go out now for a feed and then they'll have a drink as well. It used to be that people would go out for a drink and food would be secondary. Now people are actively seeking a good meal and then they'll have a few drinks. So I think things have changed with RBT and all of those sorts of things. You just cannot have a few drinks and drive home anymore. So I think that's seen the industry change. Our focus on food is massive. That's what brings people in. And obviously there's all that diversification piece. We've done a few things to try and reduce our reliance on gaming as the principal form of revenue, and that's working. And I think so many other clubs have set great examples there of things that you can do. So it's nice to see that we're sort of also building up other options and making our businesses more sustainable.
We'll talk more about diversification in a little while. I want to stick with food for a little while. You're very passionate about food and your club's been very successful in those competitions that you mentioned, 2-time winners of your regional award for Perfect Plate. What's the secret to your success when it comes to food and beverage?
I think it's passion, Darren, you know, and you've got to be invested. You've also got to have a team that are invested. Our head chef, we're really blessed with George McFarland, who just has got a great creative head and loves his food. He's a foodie, right? Our catering manager, she also has a great head for food. The benefit that Miriam as our catering manager brings is that she's also got a great head for the numbers. So actually these two guys working together complement each other really well. But, you know, we've done some really cool things like our dry-aged steak. We've got a dry-aged. I know that's not unique to us, but we've made that a feature on our menu. We've moved away from advertising specials and we advertise chef suggestions where we put our premium offerings in there, and our food business has just continued to grow out of sight. So I think if you're passionate about it, I'm a foodie myself, I guess, so, you know, as is demonstrated by my physique, I love a feed. So I think that helps, you know, if you're really focused on getting your food offering right and having something that people are talking about locally, you know, that helps as well.
So many relationships have been born out of people working in the club industry, and that's the case with you and Melanie. Tell us about how you first came into contact with Melanie all those years ago.
She was actually, met Mel working in hotels, so at the Sheraton at the airport. She was actually my supervisor at the time, the scandal. And so, you know, we became an item and then we decided to move to Noosa. And Mel ended up being the duty manager at the time at the Sheraton Noosa Resort. And I was a senior reservations agent. You know, that was one of the reasons we moved back from Noosa. You know, much as it was an idyllic location, the lifestyle wasn't great because she was working all around the clock and I was working at opposite ends a lot of the time. And so it sort of ended up just being a job and not a lifestyle. But It's true, that's the other thing I love about the industry is you do see lots of relationships develop in this industry where people met in the early days and are still together down the track. My wife, Melanie, she always says she loved to come back to hospitality. I don't think she and I would work together very well anymore.
No, fair enough. Now, look, you've got 3 kids together. Tell us a little bit about your family life.
Yeah, 3 kids, as you said. Sophie, who's 23, Jack, who's 17, and then my middle daughter, Lucy, she's 21. She works at Collegians in Wollongong, so she's a clubbie as well. Pretty proud of that. She's actually in 3rd year psychology, so she's finishing up this year her psych degree, and she's worked all the way through at Collies. So shout out to Collies for looking after her for the last few years. Another great thing about clubs, so many people have paid for their degrees and earned their living income through clubs while they've been studying. So yeah, my 17-year-old boy is just going into year 12, and my eldest Soph, she's at home still with us, and she works here in Bathurst, and good little family. Very proud to have someone coming through clubs as well.
Now, let's talk about club branding. In recent years, there have been a number of clubs that have embarked on rebrands. Some have dropped the word club altogether, while others have dropped bowling or RSL out of their names. You're staunchly against these sorts of moves. Why is that?
Look, I just think that RSL is the best brand in Australia. I think that clubs need to value their identities and actually work in with those identities. I think that, when I first started in the industry, Darren, this is another example of how the industry has changed. When I first started in the industry, everyone was saying that you should change the name. I know we had a consultant telling us to change the name from Bathurst RSL Club to Club Bathurst. I know a lot of clubs did that, and, that may have worked for them. I've been a fierce advocate of not doing that. I think that brand that we have goes beyond being a brand. It's actually why the club was constituted to begin with. It's our purpose. Those clubs who live the vision with their sub-branches and have great relationships with their sub-branches and actually pay respects to the name and, are fair income about it. Being an RSL club, our brand speaks to the traditions and sacrifices of our country. I don't think it gets any better than that as a business to be able to say what we stand for is our freedom. It's our lifestyle. It's the way that we live, the traditions, the sacrifices. I could rabbit on about it all day, mate. But I just think being an RSL club is a cracking good place to be. And, we need to make the most of that and be proud of our brand and engage our community effectively with that.
The state branch of the RSL made some comments recently about the relationship between registered clubs and the RSL sub-branches. Speaking from a local level, tell us about the relationship between Bathurst RSL and the local sub-branch.
Look, our relationship with our sub-branch is first rate. We've got a great group of people in our sub-branch. And look, that hasn't happened by accident, right? We've had good people down there, but we've had also a great board of directors. When I first came into the club, we were just finishing off the purchase of the club building from the sub-branch. There's always, I guess, a bit of sort of backwards and forwards in those transactions. We had some people that were keen to give the club a whole new identity, and our sub-branch were really concerned about making sure that they still had a place in the club. Now, at that time, a deed of accommodation services and things like that was entered into that secured all of those things. But more importantly, we had a board that said, you know what, we're always going to be an RSL. We've kept that going. Our outgoing president of sub-branch changed this year, sorry. David Mills, who was a gentleman and a scholar, he stepped down. They had a great succession plan in place. Barry Parsons took up the mantle as president. They've got a great committee down there. We work hand in glove. Those guys actually give out an award every 2 or 3 months. It's called the You Make Us Look Good Award. And they pick 1 or 2 of our staff members and they give them a trophy. That's how close we are in terms of our relationship. The sub-branch actually, as another example, had a couple of days where they did a tour of vineyards and they needed a bus driver. So I drove the bus. I donated a day of my time, if you like, so that all those guys could have a wine tasting and enjoy the day. And they've offered to do exactly the same for us. That's then also led into the relationship with the Defence Community Dogs, something we're really proud of and I've spoken about on numerous occasions. That's something that joins us with a mutual purpose. We've got the balance right here. It was a bit disappointing to hear those comments. Actually, it was more than a bit disappointing. Obviously, it was quite frustrating when we're in a club with a wonderful relationship with our sub-branch, and I think our sub-branch were taken aback by it too. It's frustrating when so many clubs are so focused on doing the right thing and having good relationships with their sub-branches. So I think if you can do that, those comments become completely unrelatable.
And Peter, I think a fair bit of frustration too with RSL New South Wales President Mick Bainbridge's comments in relation to the level of support that RSLs provide to veterans, suggesting that it fell short of his expectations. Firstly, what were your thoughts on those comments? And secondly, how does your club support the veteran community?
I guess I wouldn't speak specifically to Mick's comments apart from to say that, I don't think they were as informed as they should have been. Certainly that's not what's reflected at our club, and I think many clubs. So I think that was disappointing, right? We commit around 20% of our Category 1 club grants contributions every year towards that, from Defence Community Dogs to Legacy to Veterans Benevolent Fund. In our sub-branch, we have 2 guys working down there who are welfare officers providing advocacy and support to veterans who come into our club every day, and they don't get confused about where they need to go. They go to the desk and they say, "Where's the sub-branch?" and they're directed to it if they don't know where it is already. I think the comments from Mick Bainbridge were around, and it's just my understanding, were around they were concerned that veterans were coming in here and turning in the wrong direction and not knowing where to find the sub-branch. I just think that's completely unrealistic. The veterans that come in here looking for support find it, certainly in our club, and I think that's the case in most clubs. Every Friday morning in our Diggers Bar, we have somewhere between 30 and 40 sub-branch members just having coffee. They're not sitting there having a beer. They're actually having a coffee, sitting down, having a yarn, catching up and talking about how to engage younger members. And we've got younger members coming in. I just think that's really rewarding to see that. And I think Mick probably needs to visit a few of those clubs.
Yeah, it's such an important outlet for so many veterans across New South Wales at the local club. You're also doing excellent work in the domestic violence space. I know this is close to your heart. The club won an award at the Clubs and Community Awards this year for your work in domestic violence in that area, and you don't do it for awards. But tell us about what Bathurst RSL has done in the domestic violence prevention space in recent times.
It's a really challenging area. I guess the thing that we wanted to do is make sure that if we were doing something, that it would actually deliver a tangible improvement in somebody's lives, I suppose. We had a property that was in fairly poor condition. I think so many clubs out there have got investment properties that they're sitting on. We have others as well that aren't in great condition. We decided to grab one and invest our money into improving that, which is in the interest of the club anyway, I guess. But we worked with Veritas House, who is a local non-profit organisation that provides services to people who are escaping difficult family situations, DV, kids who are finding themselves displaced. We provided the house to them. They actually put a family in there who'd been living out of a car at the time, so that was pretty rewarding. So we're actually now talking to Veritas House about the next property that we've got lined up to do the same thing with.
You mentioned a little earlier on in our chat the word diversification. We're seeing plenty of clubs diversify revenue streams right across New South Wales. Tell us about Bathurst RSL's plans for diversification in years to come.
I guess we've looked at a lot of different things, and our strategic plan is still a work in progress, right? Like all of them are. For us, we've bought the gym next door. That was a really proud moment, particularly for me. The club had actually built the gym in 73, 74, and then the club fell into administration in 1984. And I remember going to that, had a 25-metre indoor pool and 4 squash courts. And I remember watching my dad play squash when I was a kid, and then we'd have a swim afterwards. So we actually bought the gym back in 2018 as the building. We don't run the business at the moment. Now we just enjoy that commercial rent, which is obviously money in the kitty before you even open the doors. We've got a little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop that I often talk about. That's something where we thought outside the square, I guess, and how can we engage our community differently and have people thinking differently about the club. So the grind worked really well for that. And then, we've been working for some time now on a project behind the club where we've been trying to bring about a proposed integrated medical centre. Can't say too much about that at the moment, except for that, we're continuing to look at how to secure the club's footprint in the CBD and make sure that we're viable going forward. So, it's exciting times at the club. We've still got a long runway, I reckon.
Never a dull moment, that's for sure. Now, we're blessed in the club industry to have so many great operators who've spent 10, 20, 30 years in the industry. Often these are the sorts of people that other club managers might go to for advice. Is there anyone in the industry that you would identify as either a mentor or someone you can use as a sounding board when you got to make some tough decisions? Who are some of the great operators in the industry who you admire?
One of the things I love about our region is I can ring pretty much any club manager in this region and we can bounce things off each other. We all work really well together. But I think in terms of probably mentoring, I've got to give a shout out to Dale. He's always made himself available to anyone that wants to pick up the phone. Dale's just fantastic like that. Sometimes it's good to have a sounding board, so I've really valued his advice. I guess somebody else that I would mention there is Terry Shearn. Terry's somebody who I admire immensely. I think he's done a cracking job growing Cherry Street Sports into a group. So those are 2 guys who I think really live the vision, right? They really engage their communities incredibly effectively, but also run great businesses. I would give Morgan Stewart a shout out at Blacktown. Morgan's a great guy, and he's also been a good help to us in terms of helping us develop a strategic plan. And he spent time with myself and our board. And Grant at DY, Grant Easterby, he's also been really, really great. Again, I threw my directors in the bus and said, let's go and talk to some people that know what they're doing. We visited all of those guys, except for Terry, because he only was a bit too far away to drive on a bus. And I think that's one of the other things I love about the industry, right, is all the networking. You know, Gus at Dubbo, Gus has been great. Like I say, the list really goes on.
Now, you mentioned Dale Hunt there. You've got something in common with Dale. We were speaking to him recently on the podcast. He told us that one of his hobbies is doing up old cars in his garage at home. Is this something that you like to do as well in your spare time?
It is, mate, yeah. I have to say, Dale's probably more handy than I am. I'm a checkbook mechanic, and I can do the basics. But yeah, I have an old 68 Kingswood, HK Kingswood. So it's the same model that the first Holden Monaro was, so 1968 in that HK shape. It's in my garage. It's in mint condition. It was actually my granddad's, and it was my first car when I was 16, and I've held on to it. You know, my dad's had it over time, so it's a bit of a family heirloom. I take it out every other weekend for a run. She's an absolute cracker, and it's a ute, not a sedan. So it was a 186S, and this will bore most people, but it was unique because it had a double barrel carburetor and limited slip differential and disc brakes at the front. Those things were really the new thing at the time in 68. So it's pretty special. You don't find many 186S utes around particularly. So she's somewhat of a rare piece. And yeah, I would say it's my pride and joy.
You've also got another interesting hobby, which is probably something not a lot of people know about you. I certainly didn't. Tell us about your interest in shooting.
You know, I grew up on a farm, and so we were always shooting, which is it's probably a bit contentious nowadays. It's probably not cool and probably not something that is all that well regarded. But I just always had guns growing up, and so you know I'm now a pistol shooter as well. So now I've got a couple of handguns. So you know I'm a proper redneck.
It's a popular pastime in regional New South Wales, that's for sure.
It is. I don't know. I probably shouldn't call myself a redneck. That's probably a bad term now. I mean, I don't know what you can and can't say anymore, but I will say that I enjoy going up to the range for a shot, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's good pastime, and you know it's also something that keeps your hand-eye coordination pretty good.
Now, we should point out we're talking to you over Zoom today. In fact, you know, going back before the days of the pandemic, this is probably an interview that we would have recorded on the road out at the club or when you were next in Sydney. But the wonders of technology all sort of brought to the forefront by those COVID years. Tell us about your experience and the club's experience during those dark days that, to be honest, we probably want to forget, but tell us about COVID in Bathurst.
I actually bought a crystal ball. You know, I had people saying, oh, yeah, what are you going to budget? And, you know, what are you thinking about this? What are you thinking about that? I had so many questions that I literally bought a crystal ball online and put it in my office. So when people came in and said, what do you reckon? I would just point to that and go, I don't know, have a look. You know, I think just a weird time. Nobody knew what to think. And who would have thought that after COVID, you know, with all of the government incentives and those types of things, that our businesses would have survived in many cases so strongly, and in some cases got incredible improvements. I think the thing about COVID is we thought critically about how we run our businesses. We stopped doing many things that we had just always done because we'd always done them. I think it was a good time for innovation. You know, we started doing things differently in the business. It was another good example of how the industry works together. Mates talking about, you know, what are you doing, and, you know, what do you think is a good idea? And our business model improved, you know, massively. You know, we were spending a couple of $100,000 every year on entertainment. Obviously that changed, and I know that there's a push now to move back into entertainment, and of course we're doing that as well, but we're doing that in a more sensible and measured fashion. Pre-COVID, we were doing free entertainment 3 days a week. It wasn't viable, it was incredibly expensive, and it wasn't actually bringing people in, is one of the things that we learned. Now we do targeted shows. We make sure that our entertainment is relevant and targeted towards actually bringing people in the door. You know, every cloud there's a silver lining. I think in many cases COVID made us, you know, trim up our business models and be a bit more innovative about how we were doing business and find new ways to make revenue. And that's actually worked for us all really well, I think.
Just listening to your remarks there about the crystal ball with a club grants review and the cashless gaming trial underway, I'm sure plenty of people want to use that crystal ball at the moment. You still held on to it?
Oh, I have. It's still in my office. For me, that was the image, right? It was This is an industry where who knows what's going to happen from one day to the next. We are under threat from an agenda from people who don't understand our industry and don't get it, and who just want to target the clubs industry, who want to ignore all of the good that we do. I think we were very, very fortunate at the last state election. We were in an incredibly uncertain place, and if the coalition had have got in, we would have had a very different outcome. We're not supposed to be political, but certainly no one could question that we did get a better outcome. You know, irrespective of which way you lean, the challenge for us now is making sure that we can still work with government, whoever it is, to make sure that we don't have the big target on our back. I think we've just got to try and continue to work with government as effectively as we can, and the best way to do that is engage with our communities.
I was going to ask you what the biggest challenge facing the industry was. You've kind of just answered that. I suppose my next question is the natural follow-on there. If you had a magic wand that you could wave that would improve the fortunes of the industry for the next 10 or 20 years, what one single thing would you do?
I just think that there is just so much regulation, that our way of life is incredibly regulated. Not just clubs, not just the hospitality industry, but Australians generally are incredibly over-regulated. I think government need to start focusing on the things that are really important around cost of living and making sure that Australians have got a good quality of life. I'm not saying we don't, by the way. We have an amazing quality of life in Australia, but I just think maybe they should not be governing by TikTok, and start governing by what the people actually want, the broad majority of people actually want. I think they're too influenced by social media and what a very small group of people think is important.
Pete, do you think we as an industry have to change the way that we communicate our value proposition to government? Have we been a little bit reluctant to blow our own trumpet in the past?
I think so. We constantly let our community know what we're doing, and all of those club operators out there who are doing that understand the importance of that, right? We trade on a very limited social licence. I think we all understand that. So the clubs who get that right and actually communicate with their communities effectively and engage with them effectively, I think that makes it easier. The politicians at the end of the day are swayed by votes. If your community believe that what you're doing is good, if your community believe that generally you're a good force in the community and you're doing good things, then the politicians will have no choice but to back up. It's when we give them an excuse not to. It's if we put profit before purpose. I'm a firm believer in the principle that club first, business second, but if you don't run it as a business, you haven't got a club. I think the clubs that do that and engage their communities effectively and aren't strictly focused on profit, they're the people that will sway the politicians, because when the politicians come out and they're critical of clubs, the community will respond and go, hang on, that's not quite right. I still think that we need to much more strongly advocate for ourselves as an industry. I think we've been too quiet for too long. I think we've been too apologetic for too long. I think it's time for us to get out and say, you know what, we have a right to operate a legal, legitimate business, and we do really, really bloody good things in the community. Let's keep getting that message out there.
Okay, a couple of quick fire questions to wrap up. Why do you think registered clubs will still be around in the next 100 years?
Look, I think that at the end of the day, people are social animals, right? We know that. You can take as many services and as many products online as you like, but at the end of the day, people want to get together and socialise in person. Our visitation has picked up. So we're not seeing people backing off. We're not seeing less people through the doors. We're seeing more. And I think that's because people inherently want to socialise. As long as clubs continue to be community focused first and foremost and engaging effectively, I think you have to make yourself indispensable in your community and also visible, inescapable. In Bathurst, you can't really go around many corners without running into our logo somewhere. So I think that the clubs that continue to do that, I'll still be around in 100 years.
And Pete, finally, your favourite club meal. Doesn't have to be from your club necessarily, but your favourite club meal.
I would say it's our dry-aged steak, the butter-wrapped, varieties that we do with different kind of ingredients in the butter wrap that makes them so tender and flavoursome. I think that's a great thing about clubs, right? Our steak is so often underrated, not just our club, but every club. I mean, if you go to a club and you order a steak, generally you're going to get a pretty good one.
Pete, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. You're doing great things out there at Bathurst, and we really appreciate you giving up some time to speak to us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Darren. Thanks so much for having me and listening to me dribble on.
Well, Peter Sargent there, the CEO of the Bathurst RSL Club. And that's all we have time for in today's episode of the Club Life podcast. Thanks for listening. If you're a new listener, don't forget you can listen to our back catalogue of interviews Catch up on clublife.com.au on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you consume your podcasts. Now search Club Life Podcast to find us and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you've got a suggestion on who might make an interesting guest, get in touch with the team by emailing clublife@clubsnsw.com.au. Thanks for listening and bye for now.